Title of this series is Friendship, Finding and Becoming a Good Friend. The goal for this time that Travis Joyce and I will share with you is for you to have realistic, humble, challenging, encouraging, and durable, life-giving friendships. Let me just say that again because those words are intentional. The goal of this series is for you to have realistic, humble, challenging, encouraging, and durable, life-giving friendships. Now, where we're headed this morning in our time together with what I'm going to cover, I'm going to talk about a common problem, a common cure, and some uncommon considerations. A common problem, a common cure, and some uncommon considerations. Getting right into it, let's talk about a common problem. The common problem that is, well, as I've titled it, common, is that of the topic of loneliness. Loneliness is the sense of, by perception, or the fact of, by reality, in proximity, the feeling of being alone. Now, what's interesting is that how many of us feel alone even in the presence of others. Different studies have been done and the results have come in. Over 60% of adults in the United States report feeling lonely. Young adults between the ages of 18 and 22 are the loneliest age group. Loneliness can increase the risk of premature death by up to 50%. 1 in 5 Americans say they have nobody, not many, but nobody to talk about important matters with. Older adults who experience loneliness are more likely to develop depression and dementia. Literally, the mental state of someone is affected by this. Social media use, this will surprise no one in the room, is associated with an increased feelings of loneliness and depression, arguably because of how we filter and we conclude what we observe and what that means of others versus ourselves. And on that goes. Living alone increases the likelihood of experiencing loneliness. Now, maybe you know this, but Miami is majority single. 3 million of us in Miami-Dade County, 56% of us are single. That does not mean all singles live alone. It does not mean all singles have never been married. Some have been married and are divorced. The problem of loneliness is not unique to singleness, nor inherent in singleness, but it can be exacerbated. Why? Well, because of one, as I referenced earlier, living alone can increase that likelihood. And there are compounding problems that exaggerate or amplify loneliness. So, for example, a few of those would be defensive isolation. Defensive isolation is what someone does in response to or in fear of the possibility of some bad experience. So, I use this carefully with some qualifications because I do think such terms are sometimes overused today. Those who have gone through trauma, let me be clear, when I call trauma, I don't mean a friendship that went bad. That's not trauma, friend. I'm talking about a traumatic act of perhaps physical, sexual, or similar type of act against you, in a spirit of defensiveness causes a person to not only withdraw from the immediate offender, but all others with the fear that others might be as likely to commit such an act against them as that person that unexpectedly did so. So it's the splash effect of such difficult experiences on other relationships, and so as a result, there can be that sort of muscle memory, that kind of defensive instinct to withdraw. It's a defensive isolation. That's the real. And then there's the possible. The possible is the imagination of not yet what has happened, but the possibility it could, and therefore, as an act of defending yourself from a future offense, you keep yourself separate. It's a defense of isolation from what's happened in history or what could possibly happen in the future, and you withdraw accordingly. Another compounding problem that exaggerates or amplifies loneliness is proud independence. Proud independence. This is an expression, whether it be cultural or personal, of what is seen in autonomy and personal capacity. Autonomy is an expression culturally of what we are the byproduct of, the air we breathe, the land we walk around, where we desire to have our individuality respected, our feelings allowed to reign supreme, our freedoms to allowed to be expressed, and anything against that as well, an offense at worst, a limitation at best, or perhaps it's not so much the sort of the cultural, it's the personal, which is I just don't need people. I'm a self-reliant person. I've worked hard in school. I've worked hard in work. I'm working hard in society. I'm working hard on my health. I'm working hard on my nutrition. I am accomplishing goals here. And so as a kind of an achiever, as someone who's accomplished, who's been heavily successful in whatever means I determine success, my interaction with others is only in so much as I either A, make time for them, or B, believe they will help me accomplish my goals. Which makes you proudly selfish. Because then relationships are only in so much as what you can get out of them, not what you hope to give to them. In other words, how will they serve you versus how will you serve them? Another compounding problem that exaggerates or amplifies loneliness as a common problem is not one that's so much historical or cultural or personal as it is maybe just historical in the sense of social immaturity. It's not a character flaw per se, though perhaps buried in the middle of that social immaturity are things like fear of man or otherwise that can maybe season that default, but just really, I don't know how to talk to people comfortably. I'm socially awkward. I don't know how to maintain conversation. I'm uncomfortable with eye contact. I don't know what questions to ask. I don't know how long I'm supposed to answer when a question is asked of me. And I find the whole experience unsettling because I'm inexperienced. It's a social immaturity that I have that's not so much indicative of I'm proud or not so much indicative I've had bad experiences. It's just, I just don't know what to do. Now, we can point fingers all kind of directions. Our parents didn't teach us. We didn't have good siblings that modeled for us, whatever it might be. But the reality is, a lot of us come into adulthood unsure how to navigate communication around us. And so other than expressed experiences, hobbies, sports, whatever, shared responsibilities, work, and vocation that gives us sort of content to talk about, we don't know what otherwise to do. So by default, we just take a step back from people because we don't know what step to take towards people. I can think as a parent raising my sons, knowing the heart is complicated, life is complicated, but whatever little opportunity my wife or I had to help influence our sons was to how to step into public spaces and do the simplest of things like eye contact, like handshake, like asking questions, like responding with respect, like interacting, being able to carry on conversations at the dinner table as a family. It's a rather dated study, but it's been proven that the silver bullet in so much family life that is, again, as it's nicknamed, the silver bullet that seemingly cures all family evils, is the basic, regular, weekly, throughout the week practice of the family meal. Because at the family meal, members of that family are having to learn how to listen and talk. And then talk about what they're listening to and interact accordingly. And as our kids would get older, we would begin to give them assignments. And assignments could look like, hey, tonight, would like you to give us the topic to talk about. To, hey, tonight, as they got older, we'd like to ask you to lead us in conversation about a topic you're talking about. The first thing I think as Christian parents we want to be mindful of is social immaturity with people is one thing, social immaturity with God is another. We want our children to be comfortable in conversation with God who created them. And initially, as you know this, if you have children and maybe you remember your own childhood, you can think of this, how often your prayers sound like, well, maybe letters to God. Dear God, it's me, Eric. There's a sense of this is very new to me. I don't know what to say, but I know you're there and I know I'm here and I just want to talk to you. And part of that is sort of watching and listening to their parents talk with God, and they begin to understand Him as personal, holy, transcendent, maybe not the vocabulary they pick at, but certainly something by which they recognize. And then they begin to maybe adopt that vocabulary until they actually understand its relationship and maybe begin ideally to have their own. The problem is social maturity happens not only interpersonally with relationships, it also happens spiritually with God. And so then the conversation lacks there as well. So there's a common problem. We certainly recognize this. Many people who are saved as adults come into the church with some of these relational defaults. Outside of some history with their own family, which is not always good, they don't often have a rich history of interacting well with others. So often as a pastor, I am interacting with people, at some point, many of you, personally, one-on-one, about the Bible's teaching on the church. What does it mean to be in community with accountability and taking responsibility? And people are understandably saying, this whole thing is very new for me. I was usually allowed to kind of auto-select my friends based on hobbies and interests and education and background, but now I feel like this group is being picked by someone else other than me, and I'm trying to decide if I want them, and I'm wondering if they want me. And so there often is a reluctance to commit to churches, even if it's understood that's taught in the Bible, because of the fear of relationships in that church. And then when they come in, like a junior high dance floor, often staying on the side walls, wanting to dance, but waiting for the other to come initiate, my apologies, until they're sort of coerced and modeled to come into community. And there's also a different consideration to consider. Many of us, particularly in South Florida, commendably, have in our cultural backgrounds, in Afro-Caribbean and Latin cultural contexts and other cultural backgrounds, family is of high value and is in geographic proximity. And as a result of that, family can by default often take up the time and the energy and the effort of what otherwise for others would be in the lane of friendship. You'll even see this just functionally throughout the week when you interact with each other, those who are not from here and those who are from here, and you ask what they're doing, and they're often talking about going over to my parents' house, or I'm going hang out with my siblings' house. Well, others are like, I've got none of the above. I remember when my wife and I moved from Miami to Los Angeles, lived there for 10 years. After the first couple of years, we started having kids. We had no babysitters. There was no parents to drop off our kids at. There was no one by default at family to go to's house for Thanksgiving or Christmas. It was what we're going to have to start and create ourselves. So this is the reality of where we come from as a common problem. Now let's talk about the common cure. Relationships, particularly expressed in friendship. Relationships are important. They matter to God and they should matter to you. This might seem common to some of you, unique and novel to others of you. God is pro-relationship. God is pro-relationship. God is within himself, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, Trinitarian relationship within the Godhead. He is himself relational. Before there was any of us, before there was any of this, there was him. And the mystery, but yet clarity of its truth, there was within him perfect relationship. Even the Gospel of John speaks about how the Father loved the Son before there was ever creation. So there was not just interaction in a generic way, there was an expression of affection. Additionally, God, when He created, interestingly, while so much of creation is marvelous and speaks of His handiwork, it's when it comes to the sort of the point of the sphere of His creative genius that we see Him create man and woman to be in relationship with one another. That relationship, of course, is in the context of marriage. He speaks of that not as the only, but as a model by which we would see profounder lessons to be taught, ultimately clarified in Scripture as the revelation continues in Ephesians, as a picture of Christ in the church, which we'll get to that in a few minutes. God's Word defines and directs relationships with each other. God is repeatedly correcting, redirecting, instructing, commending relationships. He is pro-relationships. You think about common relationships, ones that some of you know by experience, by contribution, others of you know by experience, by reception, which is marriage and families. Marriage, the bringing together of a man and a woman in a covenanted expression of love, a commitment of the will to commit to each other till death do you part as an expression of your love for each other. That is a unique and divinely appointed relationship. You also think about the relationship of parents and children to parents. That is a unique and definitive and sweet relationship as well. The primary means by which children know the God who created them and see the world around them are actually the parents God gives them. Tragically, and I would even argue demonically at times, that image is greatly corrupted. So often, so many of us have a skewed view at best and a destructive view at worst of God based upon the parents and their failure to accomplish the God-given task God's given them to. We could pass the mic and share endless amounts of stories, none of which we'd want to do because we don't want to be dishonorable towards our family, though there's lots of pain and hurt and disappointment there. Well, thinking of these ones you can perhaps default to, marriage and family, Travis and I in these 2 Saturdays want to talk to you about the third crucial relationship, which is friendship. Friendship. Now, I'm going to give you a definition of friendship. You won't find this anywhere because I made this up myself, which makes it highly questionable. So probably not worth writing down. Definitions in books are somehow more approved by publishers, so you should take their definitions. But nevertheless, here's mine, and I'll say it a couple times, not because I want you to capture it in word, I just want you to capture it in concept, and later on, if you want the notes, so be it. It's yours to use. I've never had original thought in my life, so just want to be clear. Everything I say is unknowingly, even to me, plagiarized by somebody else's genius. That does not mean I'm copying paste off the internet. I want to be clear. Here's my definition of friendship. A mutual relationship between 2 people who demonstrate unconditional love towards one another. A mutual relationship between 2 people who demonstrate unconditional love towards one another. This is accomplished over time, through shared experiences, deepened by shared convictions, and flavored by shared practices, both activities and expressions. I'm going to say it again, and then I'm going to unpack that. Friendship can be defined as a mutual relationship between 2 people who demonstrate, so it's not just words, it's actions, unconditional love towards one another. Meaning I'm going to orient myself selflessly versus selfishly. I'm going to start with how can I contribute to this versus what can I get out of this. So this relationship between 2 people, demonstrating unconditional love towards one another, is accomplished over time. It just takes time. Usually, the better the relationships commonly correspond to length of time. Some can be accelerated quickly, others take time. In this over time, there are shared experiences. Those experiences can be any number of backgrounds and opportunities, education, hobbies, clubs, churches, whatever it is. It's just time spent together, repeatedly, planned, unplanned. Those shared experiences are deepened by shared convictions. Now, this is where I want to just highlight for you the difference, and I don't mean to speak disparaging, the difference about, for those of you who are Christians, the difference between your friendships with non-Christians and your friendships with Christians. I am pro-Christians having friends with non-Christians. Love your neighbor, express care for them, interact with them. Be a salt and light, if you will, into this community. However, even because of the time you've had and the experiences you've shared, there is going to be, how we'll use the analogy, a ceiling on how high that friendship will go, because at some point the paths diverge. Grabbing at random word pictures here, the elevator stops at a certain floor that they don't go beyond when it comes to shared convictions. Even if they're generically religious, believe in God, even maybe religiously practiced, go to church occasionally, even respectful to your beliefs, civil, that does not mean they have a shared conviction, which is what makes Christian relationships so much more possible for depth than non-Christian relationships, either between a non-Christian and a Christian or two non-Christians. Do not misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm not saying non-Christians cannot be good friends with other non-Christians or with Christians. But the good has an implied governor on it as to the shared ideology and convictions that you have. Saying it differently, maybe more provocatively, I question how appropriate it is for a Christian to refer to their non-Christian friend with the adjective best. Unless you mean to imply with an asterisk on that word best, length of time, correspondingly shared experiences, even some difficult days, I defer to you. But if by best, and I'm even questioning the use of that term to begin with, so I think we should perhaps drop some of the junior high school language of our modifiers, our friendships, but nevertheless, if we were to use that term, I would then want to ask, how are you defining best? What is the term that you're grabbing at to define, to say that is a best friend? Continuing in my definition, accomplished over time through shared experiences, deepened by shared convictions, and flavored by shared practices. Now, shared practices is both common and uncommon grace. Shared practices, Saturday after the study, you guys want to go play basketball? So, is he asking me right now? Because the answer is yes, if he's saying yes. I want to go play basketball. Shared practices is, hey, we're going to go on a trip to Japan. Some people did. You want to go? So whether it be Saturday afternoon pickup ball or next couple of Saturdays touring in Japan, you just shared practices. You just enjoy things together. But if two people who are socially interacting and have some time but keep going in different directions because they have so limited shared practices, it will put a governor on how deep their friendship is. You just don't have as much in common because it's what's fueling the time together. But that's the common practice. Those are things you can do with Christians and non-Christians, and that's part of how we interact with our non-Christian friends. But if we're Christians, our shared practices, I said shared practices, both activities and expressions. Now, the use of the word expression is what I mean by what you do when you are together. You want to fast track your friendship? Pray together. Immediately that act will differentiate non-Christian with Christian friends. It's not because non-Christians can't pray. It's because the depth of what that means to talk to God, to whom our hearts are tied together, we hear ourselves pour each other out, and then even to pray for each other or to pray for needs of each other that we know of other relationships, all of a sudden we become braided together. Encourage one another. interact with each other. The reality is that Christian friendships should come out of the pool of Christian fellowship that itself is friendly. Let me say that again. Christian friendship should come out of the pool of Christian fellowship, which is friendly. One of the things at which I give all credit to God for is a number of points of common feedback we get about Grace Church, and not unique to Grace Church, other of your churches, same as well, is how friendly we are at Grace Church. Now, that's part Miami and part us. I mean, we all kiss each other, we all hug each other. You go to Indianapolis, there's not as much kissing and hugging going on. But it's not just the social, cultural interactions, it's also the time spent together. It's like, wait, you guys are all going out to lunch? Like you all as in like 4 of you. Oh, as in like 44. Oh, like so many of you are going that you can't all go to the same spot. You do that every week? That's surprising and uncommon. Friendliness in the interaction of Christian fellowship, Yadi and I were doing this earlier. I just wanted to encourage him that I was in a conversation this past week talking with others about him behind his back. He had no clue about that. Now, to be clear, what we were doing behind his back was not done with the intention I would do it in front of his back. In fact, that's actually the opposite of what flattery is. Flattery is to say to someone in front of them that you will not say behind them. Flattery is actually a form of self-love. It's like I'm saying things to you that you like to hear so that you will then like me. I'm securing the relationship, or I'm renewing the relationship based off of my comments to you, but not actually what I think of you. Versus encouragement is what I think about you and say about you with or without you. The idea of friendliness is in such an expression that as I interact with you, I am listening well, I'm speaking well, and when I'm not with you, I am speaking well and I'm thinking well. I do not keep a record of wrongs. This is the interaction by which the Christian cultural dynamic of fellowship within a church, which friendships like these trunks growing out of that fertile soil of Christian fellowship should be growing out of. That you have these braided together friendships. Esther Edwards Burr, Jonathan Edwards' daughter, and the mother to the third U.S. vice president, wrote, quote, "Nothing is refreshing to the soul, except communication with God himself, than the company and society of a friend. It is a great mercy that we have any friends. What would this world be without them?" End quote. She would later write to her friend, Sarah Prince, quote, "It is a great comfort to me when my friends are absent from me that I have them somewhere in the world. And you, my dear, I esteem you one of the best. And in some respects, nearer than any sister I have. I have not one sister I can write so freely to as you, the sister of my heart." End quote. Notice there what she's saying. 2 observations to make. One is obvious and one is somewhat obvious. One is obvious is she finds this person to be closer even than family. She means to speak not disparaging about family, just how her heart is tied to this friend Sarah. And secondly, the friendship formed in person so close that then when removed by distance, continued. And that's what's so unique about our time today is that we have the technology. It's remarkable as it is. You don't have to interact with a friend via letter and wait 3 months in hopes it got there. Wait 3 months back to get it back. You can WhatsApp people around the world. No product placement there, no sponsors made. FaceTime, text, it's all there for you. John Newton, the former slave trader who was converted and became a pastor and wrote the song that so many of us love and sing, Amazing Grace, said, "I think to a feeling mind there is no temporal pleasure equal to the pleasure of friendship." You know who else is pro-friendship? not just pro-relationship, but pro-friendship? God. God often calls those who belong to him friends. Exodus 33, verse 11 says, the Lord used to speak to Moses face to face as a man speaks to his friend. Isaiah 41:8, in the context talking about Israel, through the prophet Isaiah, says, but you, Israel, my servant Jacob, whom I have chosen, the offspring of Abraham, my friend. A sort of commentary on how God viewed Abraham. But there is a problem. As Ray Ortlund said, most of what we will call friendship is little more than acquaintanceship. But actual acquaintanceship is to friendship what snorkeling is to deep-sea diving. Snorkeling is fine, but skimming along the surface isn't exploring the deep. I've interacted with Christians in different contexts and settings here in Miami, Indianapolis, Los Angeles, different places I've been in pastoral ministry, and have been introduced to people in social settings, small group gatherings, churches, etc., and I've either come to know them by my observation of them or to know them by the introduction of each other to me as self-identified as friends. These are people that perhaps in the Christian context go to the same church, maybe about the same age, maybe had kids, maybe got married about the same time, grew up together, raised kids together, had jobs together, went to small groups together. And so presumably, you would think because of that much shared experience and that much shared time and that much shared conviction, they would therefore by default be close friends. But as I spent time with them individually and began to just talk to them, not just because I'm a pastor who needs to care for them, but just because I'm a person who wants to know them, I would ask question after question after question after question as a way to get to know them. And they were at times disoriented, at times encouraged if someone took this much interest in them. But I'd find things out about them, and I just assumed I'm kind of late to the dance as I get to know them, only to find out later on as I make a passing reference to what I've learned about them to their supposed friend, that friend never knew those things about them. And I'm not talking the darkest of secrets that somehow came to me like a Protestant priest in the booth of confession, let me know something they'd never told anybody else. I'm talking about just things about childhood, things about dreams, things about future, things about doubts, things about struggles, things about things that they're praying about. Things that seemingly are common conversations that I think Christians should be having in the lobby together because of how common they should be in Christian communication, but they were not having. And then I thought, I realize when I use the word friendship and you use the word friendship, we don't mean the same thing. I don't know if by default it's because you have no other examples to point to, or by desire, this is all you want out of it, to keep yourself from sort of being in community with that much depth because of what you would get from others, they would expect maybe from you. Regardless, you're actually, in the words of the analogy, you're snorkeling in friendship. You're not deep diving. Think about the example in friendship. One famous within Christian community, one to give is that of David and Jonathan. I won't cite all the references where it's said, but 1 Samuel 18, talking about David and Jonathan's friendship. As soon as he had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Later on in verse 3, it says, then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. This relationship is spoken again in 2 Samuel. Sadly, and I would say wickedly, today's cultural commentators have tried to take that language and describe it as only being possible in what was really understood as a homosexual relationship that Jonathan and David had. As David would later say to Jonathan, your love to me means more than the love of other women. As if somehow that was sexualizing it. I'll speak more to that in a few minutes. Because that interpretation comes to the filter of, one, the agenda to try to reinterpret Scripture to their own desires, and two, because people who do not otherwise know of such experiences themselves. Another example of friendship in the Scripture is, of course, Naomi and Ruth. If David and Jonathan's friendship is in the midst of others' deceit, ironically, Jonathan's own father, Saul, Naomi and Ruth's friendship comes out of tragedy. They relate to each other by relationship as mother-in-law to daughter-in-law, but as the story goes on in the book of Ruth, you can see a friendship there that is enduring and sweet. If that comes out of tragedy, then Elijah and Elisha, the sort of, senior to junior prophet relationship, is a friendship that comes out of the reality to help each other grow in their ministry. And we would be remiss not to mention Paul and countless other people in his letters, at the end of his letters, how often his friendships were formed in the context of ministry, to share an allegiance for Christ, to share the times together, to pursue others to grow in Christ, was a friendship formed in that context. What can motivate and fuel relationships, friendships within the church, is when that not only has the shared time and the shared experiences and the shared desires and the shared convictions, it's also the shared motive. We're living on mission together. We're here in Miami to not simply be a family or to make money. We're here to be ambassadors for the good news of Jesus Christ. And we are fueling each other in that pursuit. We're not just buying ourselves a time with a little Christian seasoning on the side for otherwise good life, but they could just be a little bit better with Christianity. No, we are living on mission. Friendship born of love, we should not shy away from this. We need to see it as a form of love. We need to be socially mature enough to express it in words. Just think of that by way of reflection. What do the words of your interactions with your friends look like? Are you expressing it? Do you express with each other the meaningfulness of each other and each other's lives? We should be prepared to back up any words we do speak with declarations of friendship with our actions. Your money, your reputation. I will give up my reputation of what others think of me to both be aligned with you and to protect you when others misspeak or misrepresent you. We see these friendship muscles being tested for the first time in the hallways of our high schools. You're with her? You're with him? That nanosecond of a moment is a moment to decide, how do you then answer? It comes into adult life as well, when certainly the association of that is, perhaps incriminating. Perhaps that person has done something or is a certain way, and you're tempted to be like, well, and you pull back from. Friendship steps towards and says, yes, I am. Believing that the character of your life represents itself integrity, which itself should be an endorsement, like our books today when people commend the writings of each other to one another. What do we often look at in the back of the book or in the beginning of the book? We look at those miniature paragraphs of who is saying, I read this, I recommend this. Who's endorsing you as a friend, and who are you endorsing as a friend because of that interaction you have with each other? It's your money, it's your time. So you should in your friendships, expressing in words and backing up with your actions, you should also be comfortable showing some level of physical affection. And I realize that's culturally defined. If you're in the Middle East versus the Midwest, those are going to look differently. The ultimate example of friendship is Jesus with his disciples. Not just only his disciples, there are certainly others. Lazarus, Mary, Martha as some examples. But think of what Jesus says in John 15. It's a significant one, and leaving some meat on the bone for next week so you can see this and have this unpacked for you a little bit more. John 15, Jesus says, let's jump into verse 13. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. And he says in verse 15, no longer do I call you servants, for the servant does not know what his master is doing, but I have called you friends. Remember the context. This is on the eve of his arrest, crucifixion, during which time all of those to whom he just declared friends would abandon him. J.C. Ryle says, this world is full of sorrow because it is full of sin. It is in a dark place. It is a lonely place. It is a disappointing place. The brightest sunbeam in it is a friend. Friendship halves our troubles and doubles our joys. Let me give you 6 crucial ingredients of friendship. 6 crucial ingredients of friendship. I'll cover these briefly. Number 1, time. This has been covered briefly in passing in different ways, but let me not assume it. Let me be clear about it. Time. Your calendar shows that friendship, people in particular, matter, and you plan to include them. Here's the difficulty of this today. Our busyness is often believed to be a justification for the lack of the prioritization of friendship. That is, at best, an unwise, at worst, a sinful choice. Unwise because of what checks you're going to be writing that you have to be cashing later. And sinful if that's an expression of your pride and autonomy that you do not intend to obey the one another's of Scripture, interacting particularly in ways and lanes of commitment to each other. You need time. Second crucial ingredient is communication. Your social ability or energy will influence your friendship. Saying it differently, how much you put into it can determine, not the end, but at least influence what you'll get out of it. And I mean this as a basic sort of starting point to sort of put one foot in front of the other. Some of you just need to work on how to have good conversational skills. And you literally can just Google that. How to talk comfortably with people. Beginning to listen well and ask well. Third is enjoyment. People do not repeat times with other people that they just do not enjoy. This means that there's common grace in finding people who enjoy doing things you do. There's nothing wrong with that. You're like, this is good for me. This is good for me to keep doing things with people that I should want in my life, though the things that they do I just do not enjoy endlessly. Well, I do think sometimes some of those defaults have to be maybe just audited to make sure they're not repeatedly selfish. I only like paddleboarding, and if nobody else wants to paddleboard, then I'm just going to have no friends. Like, okay, come on. You've got to be a little bit more in life than just this one lane you want to travel in. But there's nothing wrong with like finding people who have like shared interests and hobbies and interacting accordingly, and that becoming like a railway system that your friendship begins to move along. So enjoyment is a part of friendship. It's a common grace that God gives to all people in society. You will not continue with people that you do not enjoy being with them or doing the things with them. Number 4, encouragement. Words of kindness, appreciation, and comfort deepen relationships, friendships. Words of kindness, appreciation, and comfort deepen. Notice I'm saying they're words. You actually have to speak to each other. We do not assume. I've been married to my wife for 20 years, still cannot read her mind. I guarantee you can't read your friend's mind, and your friend cannot read yours. Doesn't mean you're just over the top in such an abundance of ways. You're like, okay, you're a little over the top, man. Maybe dial it back. I'm kind of wondering if you're flattering. It just seems so inordinate, so disproportionate. But I am saying at a reasonable understanding and practice, and it's more of an art than a science, that you have these words of kindness, of appreciation, of comforting people who are grieving. Think about those recently who have lost loved ones, who are going through difficult days on the eve of a surgery, who are grieving the loss of a child that never came to be through miscarriage, or maybe came to be but now has run away and is no longer can be found. With comfort. Sometimes that encouragement is just through presence, without words. You were there with me when I needed it. And by there, I meant you just were literally there. Fifth crucial ingredient to friendship is honesty. Honesty. Words of caution and correction demonstrate true love. Words of caution and correction demonstrate true love. If I'm walking along a cliff and I am in distracted mode and I'm about to step off, I hope someone who's walking with me will reach for my neck and pull me back from that cliff. But the problem is not often the physical cliff we're walking on, it's the decisional cliff we're often walking alongside. And some of us are about to make bad decisions. And are you a friend enough to me to reach for me and pull me back and say, whoa, what you're about to do, that would have cost you greatly. It's not just caution, it's also correction. You've kept going in this direction. It's causing consequences. It's unwise at best. It's sinful at worst. It's dishonoring to our Savior. It should not be replicated or duplicated by others who are seeing and imitating your example. I want to correct you. When friends tell us our faults, Charles Spurgeon said, they are, quote, performing on our behalf the most heroic act of pure charity. Because they love you more than they love the friendship with you. Let me say that again. They love you more than they love the friendship with you because they recognize that depending on the depth and the issue being addressed in that correction, they might lose you, at least in the immediate response. But they love you more than the relationship with you. That's how much they love you. That, my friend, is a good friend. The sixth ingredient that's crucial to friendship is forgiveness. Time, number one. Communication, number two. Enjoyment, number three. Encouragement, number four. Honesty, number five. Number six, forgiveness. Forgiveness. Why? Because friends are going to fail you. They are, after all, just like you, sinners. They got their own issues. They got their own shortcomings. They got their own problems. I think what's so difficult for a lot of people to get their head around is to recognize that friendship has, in some sense, the highest of expectations and the greatest of disappointments. I'd hope for so much more, and I got so much less. Like, oh, welcome to life, man. That doesn't mean we stop pursuing them, or perhaps if not them, pursuing others. We are interacting with each other in a friendship way. We interact. And so the idea is, if you are not good at forgiving, generally, let alone particularly, you will have very little around you in close proximity. Because you become guarded. You become jaded. What ends up happening is basically a low form of anger expressed through bitterness. I'm just not a forgiving person. We would do well to remember what Jesus says to Peter in Matthew 18 when Peter says, how many times do we forgive? 7 times. And he says 7 times 70. He's not saying, well, count up 490 times, and then at the 491st time, then you can just hold it against them. Again, this is why I say friendship comes out of the soil of Christian fellowship as these sort of braided trunks together, because the Christian community should be characterized by this. 1 Corinthians 13 is not a text for, no offense, marriage ceremonies. They'll use it all you want at marriage ceremonies. I'm pro of that. It's fine. Just make sure we get a little bit of context. It's a context for Christian community. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love does not keep a record of wrongs. Now, if that's your kind of soil of Christian generic fellowship, then out of that should grow really deep friendships, because you already agreed on these things. You're practicing these things. Now, if you're wondering, Eric, where are you in this thing? Well, a common problem, that was number one. A common cure, that was number one. Common cure, number two. I know how to count. Let me get you now to number three, some uncommon considerations. Some uncommon considerations come pastorally to you. Call this freestyle. Call this drop a beat, I'm going to spit a bar. Only about 20% of you know what I just said. With no intention to match my earlier points, I have, as I counted them right before I got here, 6 of them. 1, friendships fail for some common reasons. Here are some of them. Number 1, too high of expectations of a person. How much a person has got to match. Their availability, their shared interest, their shared stage of life. And problematically, sometimes the church in America can proliferate this problem. as we create subgroups within subgroups within subgroups within subgroups, that these subgroups is really my truest friends are. Jamie Dunlop and Mark Dever in their book, Compelling Community, talk about a common tactic that churches use to both invite people into and to organize people within churches is to create subgroups of gatherings so that that gathering that you most identify with becomes the people by whom is your people. So if I'm a widow with children who's a dog lover, who is a hobbyist as a unicyclist, we get together on Thursday nights at 6 p.m. That's a pretty niche group, if you ask me. Well, I obviously give an extreme example to illustrate the point. Sometimes we have too particular of a taste, an expectation of how much interest must be matched in order for us to qualify as friends. Consider across different, otherwise natural, even cultural boundaries that which in Christ that those have been put down, Ephesians 2. So, number one, too high of expectations, why some of them fail. Number two is an unwilling to forgive wrongdoings. I've spoken of that, but I want to just double click on it again. I do find that the more unwilling you are to forgive previous relationships or wrongdoings, the more unlikely it is that you're going to have future friendships, which just run out that trajectory, 60, 70. Not many friends, not because they've died, but because you're just alone. You're just alone because you've made a series of decisions accordingly. A third reason why some friendships fail commonly is a lack of honest, direct, humble communication. The result, you have shallow, passive, and proud interactions. You talk about the easy things, you never talk about the hard things. It's not a relationship worth pursuing. I mean, if all you have is sports stats, is People magazine talking points, what do you really have? You have something. It's not nothing, but it's not everything. It's so little. And as a result of that, you're so unprepared for when things get awkward or difficult. Like, hey, dude, I don't think that was an appropriate joke with my wife. Not to her, but just in front of her. I think we could be more honorable. Or, let's double down and make that even more detailed. I don't think that was appropriate comment to your wife. But maybe I heard it wrong, and maybe there's some history there, so I want to believe the best, but help me interact with you to understand. Should you be talking like that with her publicly, let alone privately? Let's talk. Too often, if there's a lack of honest, direct, and humble communication, both in what's being said and in what's being received, you will have friendships that will fail. Fourth is avoidance of difficult conversations, which relates to that. Proverbs 27:6, faithful are the wounds of a friend, profuse are the kisses of an enemy. It's easier to say, I love you, than it is to say, I'm concerned about you. But the friend should be able to say both. Do you have that, and are you that? All of that was under the first uncommon consideration. Second uncommon consideration, same-sex friendships can be some of God's greatest gifts. The problem comes when we romanticize them or sexualize them. Let me just say that again. Same-sex friendships, men with men, women with women, can be some of God's greatest gifts. The problem comes when we romanticize them or sexualize them. I was originally really helped with this point by Rebecca McLaughlin in her book, Confronting Christianity, 12 Objections for the World's Largest Religion, which are 12 sort of chapters about objections people give to Christianity, one chapter of which is sort of God anti-homosexual. And in this chapter, she rather provocatively, curiously, and appreciatively commends the reality, as hard as this might be to hear in your thinking, to not put it in the context and filter of today's cultural language. I'm qualifying what I'm about to say, but in the context of biblical language, God is pro same-sex relationships. He just does not want you to romanticize them or sexualize them. To put training wheels on that to help you visualize that textually, Titus 2, God is commending older women to younger women, older men to younger men. That's not the only expression of it. There's other examples we see of it. But the problem today is we become so fearful of others' interpretation that we withhold ourselves from otherwise very meaningful and deep friendships with the same sex. This, my friend, I think is the splash effect on an otherwise rich environment that we could be in relationally of what is commonly culturally told to us by indoctrination that homosexuality should be a normative expression. But now that confuses and blurs all the lines of distinction between same-sex relationships and friendships. Third, uncommon consideration. Friendships, ironically, with the same sex do have unique challenges. Friendships with the same sex, which I'm commending, can have unique challenges. And this is as much culturally agreed upon as is Christianly understood. As a man, I'll go first. On behalf of the men in this room, men can struggle with depth. Men can interact comfortably with information about the day's happenings, sports, politics, work, or otherwise, but know not much about each other at all. I still remember the comedian Brian Regan, who speaks one time of coming back from having golfed with his friend, 18 holes, about 4 hours of time with him. This friend who was going through a divorce or had been divorced, I don't remember it entirely, and his wife got back, and when he got back, his wife asked him, how was the friend doing? To which the husband says, fine. And she double clicks on that question and says, no, I mean, like, how is he doing since the divorce? To which he says, I don't know. To which the wife says, how do you not know? You were just with him for 4 hours. How did that not come up? To which the husband said, well, how would it come up? You can see the difference there in just interpretation of like, when you are together, what you do with that time together. Sometimes by default, either by bad or no examples we had as men and our own insecurities or pride, we don't want to be responsible for other people's information because we don't want them to return in kind and ask for our information. So we're just happy to keep things general. That could be a struggle. For women, our struggle can become with disappointment. Ironically, and yet understandably, the greater the transparency is the greater the expectancy. And so women can comfortably in communication. Again, these are generalizations. I'm not saying they're true to every woman or true to every man in their categories, but commonly speaking, women can be more comfortable in communication and subsequently offer more transparency and therefore have corresponding higher expectation. Which means if they're not careful, they're just riddled with disappointment sooner or later with each other. Bitterness, gossip, unforgiveness, slander, when they put too much weight on that person and what they were to deliver back to them. Again, this can be common both ways, but common challenges. Another uncommon consideration is that friendship with the opposite sex can be complicated. So now I'm moving from same sex to opposite sex. It can be complicated. Singles. Here's the reality. Many relationships between the opposite sex, and by relationships, I mean like dating, engagement, marriage, many relationships with the opposite sex start off with friendship. One study from University of Manitoba found that about 2/3 of people in a romantic relationship were friends first with their significant other before initiating a romantic partnership. Among those under the age of 29, this number is even higher at 84%. Let me give you a little decoder glasses to understand that. couple points here to consider. Number one, it's going to be hard to stay in the friend lane for a long time with the opposite sex for a lot of you. Not all of you, for a lot of you. Number two, I'm speaking now more to the guys who are single, one day hope to be married. Maybe slow your roll a little bit before we jump into, hey, you want to go on a date? How about begin with the friendship? And friendship could just begin with not like, hey, do you want to be friends? Check box, yes or no. Slide it across to a friend in between. But instead, do what friends do, which is get people together and hang out. And then repeat and rinse and repeat and rinse and repeat and rinse, and friendship begins to be formed. Conversations are had. You're not acting like nothing's going on, but you're acting like something's going on, but it's in the context of friendship. Too often, guys are like, oh, I don't know. And then they're like, okay, here I go. Like, they're jumping out of a plane to parachute, and they're like, I don't know how to use this thing. You're like, yeah, because you didn't even practice on the ground first. Friendship with the opposite sex can be complicated because oftentimes, not all the times, oftentimes it can lead to more than just simply friendship. And then for those who are in the married category, it is unwise to have ongoing personal friendships with someone who is not your spouse. I was having a conversation this past week with my son who is married. I have 3 sons, one of which is married. And he was, in this conversation we're having, a very enjoyable conversation, was bringing up his own initiative. He's continuing to increasingly realize how he's interacting differently with women who are not his wife. There's just like lanes there. Not like returning to weirdness of junior high, sort of cootie stage, but just a sense of like what's appropriate and not. Both time spent, information shared, acts of affection, even counsel being offered. Should I be that person, or should I direct her if she's married to her husband, or she's single to her friends, so that I'm considering this lane here of my interaction? I think it's profoundly unwise / naive for you to think after getting married that your interaction with your co-ed friends you had before marriage will continue the same way after you get married. That is a recipe, friends, for disaster. And while you might try to give me an example of how it's worked, for every one example you give me, I'll give you 10 more of how it did not work. Fifth, humor can help you or hinder you. Humor can help you or hinder you. It all depends on timing and frequency. A good use of humor is laughter. It can create lasting memories. How many of us have sat around with our friends and told stories of shared experiences that were so funny to us we cannot help but just recreate them and laugh about them? While others who were not in those experiences may be hearing about it from us, like almost wish they would because they could have that moment, but never enjoy hearing the story from us. So humor is a gift. Proverbs 15, a glad heart makes a cheerful face. We appreciate humor. It is a means by which gives us sort of shock absorbers, if you will, through life. We have to laugh because life is hard otherwise. Yet, it can help you. It can also hinder you. How? How does humor hinder you in relationships? When your number one currency in a friendship is comedy, it will keep your friendship shallow. I'll say that again. When your number one currency is comedy, it's what you're spending all the time your friendship on, it will keep your friendship shallow. I have some friends that are hilarious. I would say some of the funniest people on the planet. But ironically, for some of them, they struggle because of their own insecurity, turning the humor off and just being present without humor. And the humor is an insecurity instinct of theirs to just keep things comfortable. I'm saying have the kind of friendship you can turn that switch off and just sustain prolonged, serious conversations. It's the same thing in Christian fellowship. Sarcasm, a gift, just sort of take the realities of the world and sort of find humor in it. Sarcasm can often be an insecure mechanism people have to just always be making light, because they're just insecure and uncomfortable. 6th and final. Time and responsibilities limit the availability for many deep friendships. time and responsibilities limit the availability for many deep friendships. So it's important to understand this and expect accordingly. In other words, you likely, even for all the extroverts here, you can't have 20 best friends. You just don't have the calendar for it, unless you're like independently wealthy, and even if you are, they're not. So even if you're available, doesn't mean they are. It is okay to be with some people, not to the exclusion of any other people, but to be with some people repeatedly to enjoy the gift that God's given you with that friendship. I say this because sometimes people can conscientiously be bound to be with people, at all places, at all times, in all ways. They're known by all, but they're known deeply by few, if any. And I'm saying you only have so much time, and you already have so many responsibilities. It is going to limit how much deep friendship you have. Ideally, we'd love them geographically close to us. Realistically, some of us keep friendships from distant days gone past. I have friends from 20 plus years ago that I speak to 6 to 7 days a week via a social media app that I'm not going to say because I'm not here to do a product placement. Now, I do it in double speed because someone can be long-winded and give me TMI. But that friendship interaction goes all the time, and we've made a commitment to be with each other once a year in a retreat where we, having that much data throughout the year together, take our lives apart and put them back together. And by that, I mean what we call the whole inspection. I do the same thing in my marriage. We put it up in dry dock like a ship out of the water. You walk around the entire hull to see if there's any holes where the water's coming in. You speak into that part of your life. You come up with clear accountability expectations, put the ship back in the water for another year, address those issues, grow in light of those issues, read in light of those issues, read books together, come back and do it again. Two friends from my college age time, still close, very close, but yet we don't talk 6 days a week. In fact, we probably talk 4 times a year. And we pick right back up. One of the 3 of us has a son named after the other 2 of us. I got the first name. The other friend got the middle name. My point is, you don't always need to have close proximity to be the only means by which you can have close friends, but don't let those distant friends from a bygone era cloud out and press out any opportunity for close friends around you that God's providing. So where do you begin? You begin with prayer. God, give me the wisdom to see and give me the faith to act towards friendship, no matter how good or bad experiences I've had. Last comment. Friendships should never be a substitute for your relationship with the Lord. He is a better counselor, a better comforter, and always present who will never sin against you. The truth is, Christianity points to an even greater love than can be between 2 friends. Jesus laid down his life 2,000 years ago. Any enjoyment, comfort, encouragement we find between each other as friends is just a shadow of Christ's greater love. The reality is, no matter how good of a friend you have, no matter how best they are, they will never ultimately satisfy. And God made it that way. Why? Because only Jesus, the truest and best faithful friend, will fully satisfy. He has loved us to the point of his excruciating death, his death on the cross, his resurrection, his relationship, and his present intercession for us. You talk about a friend who talks about you behind your back. God the Son appeals to God the Father on the mercy seat on your behalf. There could be no greater friend. While he's ready to walk with you through the trials and never leave you nor forsake you. So while you might be disappointed at the state of your friendships presently or aspiring to have them futuristically, friend, let me remind you, you have one right now in Jesus. And that will be explained more the time to come.